Hello and welcome to this quick Reaper tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show off some scripts and processes for quickly naming things like items, markers, and tracks using Excel. The first thing I'm going to show off is how to replicate folder structures as tracks inside Reaper. So the first thing that we need to do is find our folder structure. So in this case, I've just got some arbitrary folders here. These could be for groupings of categories of sound, for example. We can drag select them, go to copy path, open up Excel, and paste those in. Then to separate these folders into columns, what we can do is head to data, go to text to columns, select delimited, and then next to other, we can just put in a backslash, and that will separate each of those folders into columns. So go ahead now that we've got these separated, select copy and head into Reaper, insert multiple tracks, select 3, and run the script clip track. So rename selected tracks from clipboard lines, and that's all it takes. So in this case, obviously they were just 3, but if you have hundreds of folders or anything that you're trying to replicate, then that can save quite a lot of time. The next thing I make use of quite a lot, and that's for when I'm recording sample libraries or when I've got a library that's separated by thirds, for example. So I'll show you what I mean here. I've got some samples for another library that I'll be releasing a video for soon, but for this, I just recorded everything in thirds. So you can see we have the MIDI value 43, 46, 49, and I want to try and replicate that inside of Reaper. So there are ways you can create incremental numbers inside Reaper, but they're generally just single, like 1, 2, 3, 4. We can start with 43. So that's our first note value. And then we can go equals A5 plus 3 and drag that down like that. And then the last one is 67, I believe. So with those selected, we can go ahead and copy. And then in the bottom right, we can see that the count is equal to 9. So that's really handy for knowing how many folders we need to create, or how many tracks rather. So insert multiple tracks, we'll select 9 at the end of the project. And using the same script again, we can replicate that those pitch separations. And we'll just create another track here for neatness. Great, and then what we can do is select all of these, just drag them onto our samples track. And luckily these are already separated by dynamics. So we've got, quiet, loud, and loudest. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, with all the pitches ascending. So it's already pretty neat, but what I want to do is get these now into these folders. So what we can do is say track name same, and then move selected items to tracks with the same name as items. So if we run that, it should work now. And it's basically because within this item name, we've got a 46 separated by underscores, and it's moving them onto the track that looks the closest, I guess. If for whatever reason it's not working, what we can do is selecting them, run name manipulator, just this one. And we'll get a little window. What we can do is get rid of the last 8 or 9 characters and the first 3 characters. And then regardless, it should work. So you can use whatever scripts are available to just get rid of it. And that could be a nice way to quickly get a bunch of items onto different tracks for organization. So a use case for this might be that I want to rename these. So I'm going to get rid of the names entirely. We can see within the naming structure, we've got the project name, the MIDI note value, and the dynamic marker, so how loud it is. And I want to switch these around. So this might be a good use case for doing something like this. But first, what I'm going to do is run align items. So we can align items, align selected items across tracks. And these are all the same length already because of the way that I edited them initially. So that's pretty handy. And we can just move them out a bit. But first, what we'll need to do is get our dynamic ranges back in again. When I'm receiving a project for someone, I'll usually get markers, and they might be named something like this. So we'll have dynamic 1, maybe one will be lowercase, and the third one will be something like, maybe there's a space in between. So it's really handy to have those markers, especially in a really long project, but I'll often be using these for naming my items. So this is where my third Excel tip is going to come in, and that's as exporting markers and regions to spreadsheets. So if we just type in export marker, we'll see that there's quite a few scripts here for doing various things. So for DaVinci Resolve or for YouTube, but I'm just using the default one here, which is markers regions, export markers regions to file. That'll open up a window. We can go into our root project and just export them straight in there. Then we can open that up. And we'll see that they are already neatly organized. So we'll have marker 1, 2, 3, dynamic 1, 2, 3. There's not really a quick way to automate this, I think. So I just tend to go through and rename them so that they're all consistent. And that's just important for when we're using them as naming. And then another thing I might want to do is turn these markers into regions, and that's really simple. So there are scripts inside Reaper where you can convert markers to regions within a time selection or within the whole project, but I find that those tend to not be very helpful and not very targeted. So we can quickly go in here and copy the start to the end of the previous item. And then, so it's 1326, we'll say maybe 39. We can just make it up really. And that's going to turn these markers into regions. We don't have to worry about length or changing the M to an R. That will be taken care of for us. So we'll save that now. And we'll just do the inverse of this, which is import marker. And we have two choices, either merge with existing or replace all. I tend to replace all. Merge with existing might be helpful if you're just adding in new markers, but in this case, we just want to replace. So we'll do that, select, and we'll see that that has now updated all of these so that these are all consistent. And we also have regions now, which is quite handy, especially if we want to render into separate folders. So then we can drag select these and say region name take and rename selected takes from regions. That will give us the right dynamic now. And we can run control, well, that's my keyboard shortcut, but we can go to extensions and label processor. And we can do GG again, so that was the project name. We'll do /L because that's the current label, which we can see here, and that's going to keep that dynamic tag, and then /T because these are all now in their respective pitch tracks. So now we've just switched those around. And yeah, again, if we go into rendering now, we could potentially use the individual regions that each of these are in as so like that. We can see we've put that into dynamic 1 folder and the name is appended onto the end there. So yeah, that's just a few tips for using Excel with Reaper. I hope that was handy. These are all quite generic. You can find a lot more scripts related to this by typing in things like CSV, clip, so clipboard, copy marker set to clipboard, etc. But I find that these sort of 3 quick workflows are the ones that I tend to use the most and the most general, so you'll be able to use them in a lot of different contexts.